Thank you so much for the recent support on my last Moonboard training video. I think a lot of people found it helpful and it's actually the most successful video on my YouTube channel right now. So I thought I'd make a part 2 and I'll delve a little bit deeper on what I do on Fridays on my schedule. So in this video, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what I do on a typical project bouldering day on the Moonboard. I'll share some tips that I've learned that will make the process smoother and probably more satisfying for you. After, I'll break down Left My Phone in Denver, which was my first V8 that I've sent. I know it could be hard to relate to this video if you don't have a Moonboard 2017, but I'll be sure to throw in some generalized tips that will be useful for anyone who watches this video. I thought it was really funny because I woke up today and I saw this video that Lattice Training posted, and I pretty much do the same thing that they list here. I pick 2 to 3 limit problems. I do rest a lot, probably sometimes more than 5 minutes, and I also work the 3 levels that they listed here too, which is like linking moves, linking sequences, and also doing a whole limit boulder. As a quick side note, a lot of people have been sending me their sends of the Moonboard ever since I posted the video. Everyone's been telling me about their French grades, so they'll be like, oh, look at this 7A I sent, 6B I sent. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. So given that a lot of those people were from the US, here's how to switch it to the V grade instead of the French grade. Just click this button and then all your sends or all the problems will be listed as a V grade. And then the usual settings I put in, back then I was looking for V8, so I went to V8 here. I went to benchmarks, and then I usually pick most repeats. It lists the problems from most repeats, which is generally the easiest, to least repeats, which is generally the hardest. So number 1 on here, which is probably the easiest, would be Moon Tower. So for the longest time, I picked Moon Tower as my limit boulder project, but it was actually way too hard for me. The problem itself is 2 huge dynamic moves, and it's pretty spanning, and I was never able to stick the first dynamic move. I actually injured myself because I had like an overuse injury of trying to throw the dyno so many times. The right hand is a really small hold, so I ended up like having an overuse injury on this joint and also like this tendon on this area. And that's actually the injury that I talked about in my last video, where I had to take a month off around September, October to recover from. During that time where I was off and I came back to climbing, I was purely doing that training routine that I listed in the video. Around the last 2 months, I was deciding to like, okay, maybe I should bump it up and try the V8s again. That's when I saw Left My Phone in Denver, because I was so sick of trying Moon Tower. I was actually like traumatized of like trying it again because I had such a hard time. So I looked up some beta online and I saw Andy Liu do it, and his beta is actually like the different beta of what I used. In his video, he does like this pretty dynamic move to catch I-13, the red hold. I tried it, but it was pretty hard because I-13, the in cut is like on the bottom right, and it was really hard to grab as a dynamic move and hold it together. So in one of the sessions, I tried the move statically, and surprisingly it worked, and I was able to even add a couple links to the moves after it. So I was like, okay, this V8 might be possible. The cruxes on this problem is pretty much the beginning. It's really hard to lift yourself off the ground on the undercling, and there's also a crux at the end to end on K18, just because it's a really small ending hold and I've never actually ended on that hold before. But overall, thinking about it now, I think Left My Phone in Denver is the easiest Moonboard benchmark compared to Moon Tower, just because even though it's more technical and there's more moves, everything flows nicely if you have the right beta. Honestly, you just have to keep it together for all the moves, and yeah, I think it's a lot more higher percentage than Moon Tower. So here's like some of the things that I think really helped contribute to a good send day that day. I'll split it into the things I did the day before the session, the day of the session, and like during the session, if that makes sense. One thing that I felt really contributed to it is just good creatine dosing. So I've been using creatine for a really long time, probably like near the start of my climbing career. Creatine, it basically increases your ATP reserve, so there's more ATP available for muscle contraction, so it makes you lift heavier, and it just makes you stronger overall. I usually dose 5 grams a day, which is the recommended dosing, but do make sure to do your own research and maybe consult a physician if you are going to look into this. Overall, most people say it's pretty safe, and there's actually a lot of research that goes into creatine. People say it's like the most researched supplement out there for athletes. So that's what I used. I actually would not recommend the powder form, which I'm holding here. It's just kind of inconvenient because every day I have to scoop out a little bit and then measure it, and it takes a lot of time. So I would recommend getting the pill form of creatine, which is probably what I'm gonna get after I finish this bag. But just to paint a picture of how good it is, I think back then when I was trying weighted pull-ups, I would do like a set with 3 reps. I went from doing 45 pounds with 3 reps to 60 pounds 3 reps. So that was like a 15-pound increase in what I was able to pull just from taking creatine alone. You do have to load your body with creatine, so it does take a while for your muscles to get saturated with it, but it does make you strong. Like after a week or 2 weeks, you'll definitely feel like a big difference on how much stronger you are. All right, so that's one thing, but then there's a second thing that I did the day before the session that I feel like was really important. Where is it? Climb on. So I feel like sometimes my fingers are just very calloused near the tips, and they're hard, and sometimes it feels like whenever I grab onto a small hold, it makes my fingers feel slippery and the grip is not as good. So I use Climb On when I want to have a good session when I climb. I feel like it just makes my fingers a bit more pliable, the skin a little bit more pliable, and that would allow me to like have a better grip. Small subtle detail, but I do put this on the day before I want to climb, and I feel like it helped a lot. So now I'm going to talk about the day of the session. And usually on Fridays, where I have my limit boulder or projecting day, I still have school beforehand. I have school from like 8 to 12 p.m. I go to medical school, so a lot of the things that we talk about, we learn, or we discuss in class, it's like so intellectually stimulating and draining that I feel a little bit burnt whenever I go home and prep for my climbing session. So I always take a nap. I feel like taking a nap before a session, it just resets your brain and you become neurologically more efficient. And you definitely want to have that efficiency when you try something at your limit, something that's very hard and very intense. So I feel like it just allows me to have a neurological advantage of like coordinating my muscles and feeling awakened during the session. Something that's also helpful is just taking a little bit of caffeine before your session. I think it increases your mental and physical performance quite a bit, and it also keeps me like a little bit more alert during the session. You do have to be careful because caffeine half-life is 6 hours, so after 6 hours of ingesting it, half of it is still in your system, so it might disrupt your sleep later in the day. So a lot of people, they suggest taking caffeine around 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. But honestly, sometimes I just take it at 3 or 4. I have the worst sleep schedule sometimes because of this, but if it gives me gains when I climb, I'll do it. So I'm going to talk about the session now. Whenever I walk into the gym, my warm-up is always the same thing. I take 30 minutes to climb from easy to hard routes, so I start with like V0s to V1s, V2s, and I go all the way up to like V6, and it's not on the training board, so just gym climbs. And also, after every single climbing route that I do, I always rest on the mats for about like 2, 3, or 4 minutes. Your body is still warming up physiologically when you're off the wall, so like during those 3 or 4 minutes where you're doing completely nothing or you're just on your phone, like you're still warming up. So I usually space it, like I do a climb, I wait 3, 4 minutes, and then I do another climb, and eventually I get to V6. And then after that, I warm up a little bit more on the moonboard. I climb on non-specific holds, and it just preps my body to be on the moonboard because it's quite steep and you do have to adjust to it. Another quick tip, something that I've been using that I think has been helping tremendously is using a resistance band. I do like a lateral rotation motion with my arms, and that warms up your infraspinatus and your teres minor. Those are considered the small muscles of your back, but even though they're the small muscles, they're really important because they help you suck closer to the wall, and I think that's required for a lot of the moonboard movements. I also do these motions, I don't know what you call them, but I think it just allows me to warm up more specifically a lot of the range of motions for the shoulders and the back. So that has been very helpful. I feel like it just wakes my back up a lot more. Something that I used to do that I don't do anymore is only warming up on the hangboard before moonboarding. And that was really bad because even though my fingers may be warm, my back is totally neglected for the warm-up. I recall that when I used to do that, I would have like the worst moonboard days compared to what I have now. The best thing I find is to just climb regularly to warm up, and it just wakes up your whole body a lot better than if you were to just hangboard. So now I'm going to talk more about the moonboard session. On that day, I did not work the V8 alone. I was working on some of the V4s that were still quite hard for me. So I would consider that like still limit bouldering because a lot of the V4 benchmarks on the moonboard, there's some at the end of the list that are pretty hard. I was able to send Whiskey and Wonderland that day, and there was this problem called Witness the Whiteness that I was having a really hard time on, and it's still a limit boulder problem. Like I can send V8, but there's a lot of V4s that I try and I still can't do. I think a factor is that I tried to do my problems without cutting feet. I think if I were to cut feet, maybe I would be able to stick it and just do it, but it just doesn't look as clean to me. So I tried to climb all of the moonboard problems, especially the V4s, with good body tension. I think working on these 3v4s was very helpful because it allows me to get even warmer. Usually I could tell that I'm super warm and I can do something that's really hard when I feel like my hands just get really hot and they kind of even get a little bit moist or sweaty. That's usually when I can pull really hard and I feel like really strong. So after working on Witness the Whiteness and falling off quite a bit, I felt that warmness and I was like, okay, maybe I should start on the V8 because if I go further, I'll feel more fatigued. The crux of Left My Phone in Denver is the start. It took me a couple sessions to really figure it out, probably because I wasn't trying my full 100%, but this was the layout of how I put my fingers, and also you have to get your legs out of the way. It feels really weird. One other tip is I found that if I put my right foot underneath the left foot foothold and I push off with my right foot, it was a lot better. So those three things really helped lifting off the ground, but even still, I did have to like punch through it and right away bump my left hand up to the yellow hold. Because if I held myself on that undercling for too long, I would have wasted too much energy. So I always made an effort to just like punch through to the next hold after I lift off right away. You can see that I tried to really punch through for the first part. I did dab my butt for a little bit, but I was like, let's just go anyways and see how far it takes me. The middle section was always pretty flowy for me and I cruised through it. And the second crux is the ending. I always felt like the yellow hold was really small and I always had a hard time keeping the body tension for that. So I did some changes. After the first attempt, I went ahead and started to brush the holds. I love brushing the holds in between attempts because it allows me to add 1 to 2 more minutes of rest time in between attempts. Not only that, it also allows me to really think about how I'm going to change my next attempt to make it more successful. The time when I'm just looking at the hold and brushing it, it's really a good time to just think about the problem. In between the attempts, I would study on my iPad for schoolwork because I find that it helps pass the time a lot faster than just if you were to go on your phone for 5 or 7 minutes. So that's usually what I do in between attempts and it's actually pretty enjoyable. When I came back, I made an effort to switch out one of my shoes. I went with the Tenai Iari for my right foot because on one of the footholds, near the end of the problem, it was quite a small foothold and I felt like I just needed a little bit more edging power to stick the move to the right ending hold. And it works because the Evolved Shaman, even though it's aggressive, it's considered a soft stiffness, whereas Tenaya, it's aggressive and a medium stiffness. It's actually pretty stiff in one of the more stiffer shoes that I own, so I felt like it was really helpful on edging for the last couple moves. Also, it just feels badass to wear 2 different shoes, like you feel like Adam Ondra or something. After I switched out the shoes, my next attempt was kind of unsuccessful because I was having a hard time lifting myself off the ground again. It's really like the crux of the whole problem. You can see me shift left and right, like shifting around my body weight, and eventually I wasn't able to do it and I decided to throw away that attempt just so I could rest a little bit more. Eventually I was able to lift myself off and I cruised through the middle section, and it turns out that the right shoe switch with the Tenaya shoe, it was super helpful. I just felt like I transferred the power to my right foot a lot more and I was able to grab onto the yellow hold quite easily and controlled. I did cut here and then I went to go for the match, but even though I did match, Moonboard rules do state that you need to hold on controlled for 2 seconds, and I didn't do that. Even though I felt like I finished the problem, I knew that if I posted this, I would have gotten flamed for it. So I was like, okay, I just gotta suck it up and do it again. So then for the next attempt, I was again struggling on pulling myself off the ground. Once I did manage to get off the ground, I went for it again, and this time I felt like I needed to full crimp and bear down really hard on the yellow hold. And something in the back of my mind told me like, don't bear down as hard as you can because you'll injure yourself. So I kind of just punted that attempt again. So for the last attempt, I decided to do something a little bit different to end. So let's say this was the yellow ending hold. Instead of doing like a full crimp and bearing down and like extending this joint, like I did in the past attempt, I decided to do like a 3-finger half crimp, and then I would just wrap my fingers on my index finger. And this allowed me to avoid like the mental block of like getting injured because doing this is pretty similar to doing this, but like just a little bit more finger wrapping. So after I did that and I made sure that I hit that hold like really well and have a lot of surface area on the ending hold, I just made sure that I had my body really secure and controlled, and then I went for the match and it actually worked. So I was like ecstatic after that. I remember very distinctly for the last attempt that I was recalling this video of Alex Migos on Fight Club, where after he sent that climb, he said something like, I could end this right now.
to end this right now. I just have to climb to the top.
So throughout the last attempt, I kept replaying that line over my head. So even when my foot slipped right here, my mind was like, I can still end this right now. And it helped me like overcome that slip, because sometimes when you slip, you kind of want to throw away that attempt. But I was like, I just gotta push through. And you gotta love, like, whenever you finally send something that is the next level, the adrenaline rush is just so crazy that once you go off the wall, anything that you do or say is just like kind of stupid. So here I said something like, yeah! Woo! I told myself that I could end this right now, and I ended it. First V8!